So I'm very happy to be here at the Chai Chat Club today with you. And my name is Dan Hassenfeld. I'm a U.S. lawyer, a visiting lecturer at the Tashkent State University of Law this past spring semester. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is thinking about American law. I'm an American lawyer. I'm interested in law. I'm a law teacher. I like to teach law. And so I figured I would talk to you a little bit about law. But I put in the title thinking about American law because I'm interested in thinking. When I went to university, you know, this is another difference, by the way. We first go to, for lawyers, we go to university and we don't have to, actually we cannot study law for our bachelor's degree. We have to study something else. And then after that, we go to the law school. And so when I studied my first degree, I studied philosophy. So I'm interested in legal theory and philosophy of law. And that means I'm interested in thinking. So I'm going to be talking about thinking before we start talking about law. So I'm going to share some words and some pictures related to thinking. So this is just, you know, some of it has there's a little hard work and then there's a little fun coming up. And then second, I will share an exercise that law teachers in America give to their law students. It's a very, very common exercise. So if you do this exercise, I'll show you some pictures, ask you some questions. This is what a student at the law university in the United States would get. And then third, if we have time, I will tell you about an American legal case decided by a court and ask you what you think about it. Ask you what you think about it. This is what I did with my students too. I mean, this is what I taught at the university. I said, this is an interesting case. I would like to know what you think about it before I tell you what the judges decided. This is a case that was in a court and it was decided by judges, and I will tell you what the judges decided. Now, another difference in America, between Uzbekistan and America, we have what's called a common law system. You might have heard about that. Here you have a civil law system. Civil law emphasizes the law, it organizes the laws in codes. So if you want to look up the law, find out what the law is, you will normally look at a code. Well, we also have codes. It's made up of what we call statutes. I guess that would be something like Konun law, or what else would we have? Zakoni, statutes. These are the words, these are the laws that we gather into our codes. But we also have law that is made by judges. And this is a different system from yours, where the judges have cases come before them, they decide them, and then they have to write their reasons for why they decided that. These are published, and these are called precedents. Precedents are things that when the next case comes, the next judge will say, well, how did we decide a case like this before? Let's see if we can find some cases that are similar. So that's a big difference in our legal systems. Okay, so let's go on. So we'll come to that later, I hope. So number one topic, thinking. You might hear people say, think for yourself. Think for yourself. Did you ever hear anybody tell you that? No. We hear it, but I don't know if that's a difference in Uzbekistan. Whether they say, the adults say, or the teachers say, we want you to think for yourself. Well, what do they say if they don't say think for yourself?
Read the book, do everything by the book, do as I say.
Read everything learn everything by the book, and then what?
Do what I say.
Do what I say. Then that's another difference.
That's
See, that's another difference. In the United States, in America, and also I believe in Europe too. What we tell our students is, think for yourself, because we're not always going to be here to give you the answers. Now, of course, when children are little, young students, they have to learn some things and they have to just know their arithmetic and things like that. But by the time you come to university, the university teachers are saying, you think for yourself, because soon you're going to go out into the world, you're going to be doing things, and you're going to have to come up with the answers. you're not going to have anybody to ask. If you're doing anything that is new, you're going to have to figure it out. So if you are always thinking, I'm going to ask the teacher what the answer is, so I can tell the teacher and just do what the teacher says, well, you might not be able to do your own thinking when you're working. So that's a message that I want to bring you from America, which is consider thinking for yourself. This is the first thing that I did in my law university class, the first thing that I taught them. So how do you think for yourself? Well, consider this quote. Question?
No question. I just want to comment on this. I watched one movie, Paper Chase.
Yes.
Paper Chase.
Yeah.
In this movie, I saw that there was one professor at Harvard University and for contract law, and he said that to the students, you learn the law and I train your mind to think. And I think there was a quote by Einstein. Einstein said that education is not just learning the facts, but also training the mind to think.
Yes. So that's a great statement, wonderful statement. What is your name?
Shukurullah.
Sukroma. So
No, just call me Kelvin.
call you who?
Kelvin.
Calvin?
Yes.
Well, you know, I've been using the Uzbek names, and some Uzbek names I have learned,
Yes.
and some I haven't learned yet. But if you want to be called Calvin, here we are in the Tashkent, the American Center at Tashkent, then it's easy for me to remember.
Yes.
But this is really, it's really interesting that you mentioned that film. That is a picture of how I think, it's not like that at Harvard Law School anymore. But this was something that was really overplayed. I mean, it was made to a little exaggerated. That this teacher is saying, I have all the knowledge, you know nothing, I will train you how to think, you know. Okay, but it's an entertaining movie. If you like law movies, my wife and I love law movies because she's a lawyer and I'm a lawyer. So we just saw with some students a great movie, Gideon's Trumpet, another great law movie. We got it on YouTube. We were streaming it on YouTube here. And what that's about is a man who broke into a place and stole some things. He was sent to jail for 5 years, but he did not have a lawyer. He could not afford to have a lawyer. And he asked the court to appoint a lawyer, to say, we will give you a lawyer and the state will pay. And they said, no, unless you are facing capital punishment, unless you might get the death penalty, we will not give you a lawyer that we will pay for. You have to just do it yourself. And he did not succeed. He was convicted, went to jail. And then he said, this is unfair. I'm going to write a letter to the U.S. Supreme Court saying I should have a lawyer. I was convicted unfairly. And the U.S. Supreme Court gets these kinds of letters, and they read his letter, and they said, okay, we'll hear your case. And they named a lawyer for him at the government's expense. The government had to pay one of the most distinguished lawyers in the United States. He later became a judge on the U.S. Supreme Court himself. And so then he wins in the Supreme Court. So it's really a great movie, Gideon's Trumpet. So if you like law movies, it's a good law movie to watch.
Can you repeat the name of the movie one more time?
Yeah, it's. I should write it out over here. But what's interesting is you can get it. I mean, at least we were able to get it just streaming. Okay, so Gideon was the man's name. So it's Gideon's Trumpet like a horn. You know, that's another thing I like about Uzbekistan. When we were living in our apartment, and one Friday night in this parking lot of the apartment, people came and they set up a stage for the musicians. And then Saturday morning, the band came. And we said, oh, this must be about a wedding. It must have something to do with the wedding. And we couldn't figure out, nobody could tell us. Are they playing music for the groom, for the bride? We didn't understand that. But we loved the music. And they had those very long, ooh, I love those. So these are some of the things. You see why I'm sad to go home from Uzbekistan? Okay. So let's keep going. So consider the quote. So this man here is Arthur Schopenhauer. He was a German philosopher, oops, a German philosopher, he wrote this that year. Oh, now what do I do? It's like I shouldn't have touched it. Oh yeah, okay, that's easy. 1788 to 1860. And here he wrote an essay on thinking for oneself. That was the topic of his writing. So he says, just as the largest library, badly arranged, is not so useful as a very moderate one. Very moderate, in other words, one that's not so large. That is well arranged. I'll go over this a couple of times, so don't worry. So the greatest amount of knowledge, if not elaborated, that is, developed in more detail by our own thoughts, is worth much less than a far smaller volume, like amount of knowledge, that has been abundantly, that is much, and repeatedly thought over. So he's saying here, this is great, we're right with a library here. If you want to find a book, you know where to look. But imagine if all these books were in a big pile on the floor. Okay? You would find it very difficult to find the book that you want. You wouldn't even be able to tell what was in this big pile of books. So he makes this analogy. He's saying a library is like your knowledge, the things that you know. And so he says, just as the largest library, you could have a big, big library, but if it's not in order, then that's not going to be as useful to you as a smaller library that's well arranged. So we could go to the Library of Congress or the National Library, many, many books, that's a huge library. But this smaller library is very useful because you can find the things that you need. So he's saying the same goes for your knowledge. If you know things, but you don't think about them, well then that's not going to be that valuable to you. Because if you think about it, and then, as he goes on to say, for only combining, putting together what we know, by comparing every truth with every other, do we fully assimilate, here it means take in and understand our own knowledge and get it into our power. Now I think this is really great. He's talking about power. We're supposed to be talking about a library, but he's writing about thinking for yourself, and he says, think about what you know, get your knowledge into your power, because then you can do things with it. That's his point. We can think over only what we know, so we should learn something, but we know only what we have thought out or thought about. Okay, did we finish that? Yeah, I guess that's the end of that. We know we can think over, we should learn something, but then don't just say, okay, I'll just give it back to the teacher. Think about it. Think about it in light of your own experience. Think about it in light of what is important to you. Think about it in light of what you want to do. And then it will mean more to you, and it will be more valuable, and he just uses this word, useful. You can do more things with it. Now, of course, when I'm here in Uzbekistan, and I see my students, and they know Uzbek, and Russian, and English, well, I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed. I said, I only know really English. I know a little bit of Hebrew. But they really speak 3 languages. Then someone says, oh, I'm from Bukhara. I know Tajik too. And I say, wow, that's really great. So I know that you here, and that's another difference, that in America, most people don't know many languages. Here you know a number of languages. So that's a very good thing. And I know that as you go learn English and you will have access to a wider world. And that's a very good thing. Okay? So anything you didn't understand in this quote from Schopenhauer? Questions? You get that point? Don't just learn it to give it back to the teacher. Think about it. And you may find some problems. And you may say to the teacher, I know, I've met some teachers, and not all of them want the students to learn for themselves. So you may say, teacher, there's a problem here. And they may say, I take care of the whatever subject, and I'm going to teach you to think, so listen to what I do. Okay, well, don't be discouraged if they say that. That's what I want to tell you. Don't be discouraged. Any questions? Okay, now we have some fun. Okay, oh, well, anyway, so can anyone tell me in your own words what Schopenhauer is saying? Does anybody, I mean, we talked about it, but does anybody want to say in your own words or something from your own experience that is related to what Schopenhauer is saying? Okay, it's all right if you don't. You can say, I know you'll think about it later. Any questions or comments? Comments? thoughts about Schopenhauer? Maybe your comment is the teachers tell us we just have to listen to the teacher. Well, here's an alternative to that. Now let's do an exercise. So what does the next slide say? This is going to be an exercise. I want to set you up for this before I show it to you. Just read it and tell me exactly what it says. Does everybody understand? Just tell me. You can just call it out. Just call it out. What does it say? It is what it is. Good. Anybody else? Anything else? Read exactly what it says.
It is what it is.
What?
It is what I is.
Skipping a word,
It is what it. What were you?
Yeah,
you
what
said
you
something
know.
else. No, it is what.
it
Yes. Did you hear that? Say that. It is what it is. Now we all know this saying. It is what it is. Oh, I have to tell you this. I used to have another way of doing this, which I inherited from someone. So I saw somebody else did it, and it was Paris in the spring. Paris in the spring. And then I changed it to Tashkent in the spring. Fine. But the problem was that you don't have the, right? You don't have in Russian. And so people would get confused by it. The. You don't have the. You have it in English. So then I tried to make one without the articles. It is what it is. People know that. But there's actually one other thing I didn't hear somebody say. Anything else over here?
Double X.
Double X. Right. What usually happens is the first person says, it is what it is. I say, good. What else? And by the way, this is just like people are working together on it. And that's natural. That's what I said when I first saw it. It is what it is. Okay? But then they say, well, what do you mean? What else is there? Do I have to read this too? It is what it is, XX. Double X. And then they say, okay, yeah. And I still say anything else. And then after a while, someone says, it is what it is. So why do I show you this? To remind you of the importance of reading carefully. Read carefully. Now, there are going to be some things you don't have to read carefully, but some things you do, and it's an important skill for understanding and also thinking about what you read. So if you're reading something, you have to read it carefully. If it's, and I find with reading philosophy, it's sometimes hard to understand. I have to read it a few times. Now, when we went to Kazakhstan that I told you about, we had, there was a film that they showed on the plane to Almaty, and it was about, I think it was about Al-Farabi. And they said that Al-Farabi, who they say one place he could come from is Kazakhstan, was reading Aristotle. How do you say Aristotle?
Aristotle.
Okay, so he was writing and he said, I've read Aristotle's Metaphysics 40 times. And there's still some things I'm learning each time I read it. So it is what it is. It's like a silly game, but sometimes it is important to really focus on that, read it carefully. If you don't understand something the first time, read it again, and then that is, the effort is worth it, because then, as Schopenhauer says, you get it into your power. So reading carefully, if you don't understand something, ask your teacher, ask your friends, ask yourself. That's a way you learn in reading. Okay, now I'm going to show you a picture, and then just tell me what you see. You can call it right out. Duck. Rabbit. Yeah, see both? Does everybody see both?
Yeah, I've seen this trick before.
You see that? Oh, you've seen this before?
Yeah, everyone says like it looks like duck, but it's actually like rabbit.
Yeah. See that? What's your name?
Aziz.
Aziz. Okay, thanks. What's your name? Nilufat. Okay, good. All right, so it's a duck, but it's also a rabbit. Now, some people can only see one of them. And they say, well, I see the duck, but I don't see the rabbit. Or I see the rabbit, I don't see the duck. And then you say, well, you see that little thing over there? That's the back of the duck's head. That's actually the rabbit's mouth. And then these things here are the duck's, bill. We call it the bill of the duck. And that's the ears of the rabbit. Then they say, oh, yeah, now I see it. So this is to success. Some people now have seen this. It's rare that somebody has seen this. So now it's good that you have seen this. Aziz, people have seen it. I just figured it would be fun. So why did I show this one to you?
Look careful.
What? Oh,
Check out different meanings.
to check out different meanings. Very good. What's your name?
Alisha.
Alisher. Alisher. See, that's the name that I know. Okay, so to remind you, when you think about certain questions, including some legal questions, as we'll see, look at the question from both sides. And this is the duck rabbit, to remind us to look at questions from both sides. That's something that we learn when we study law, because you might just talk with somebody who's not a lawyer, that person, you ask them a question, this is the way it is. Well, maybe listen to those other people, they have another view. And so the lawyers have to look at it from both sides. And so the duck rabbit is just a reminder that there's different ways to see the same thing, because it is the same thing. I could say it is what it is. It's this line, but different people will describe it in different ways, and it even was designed to look like two different things at once. And there are some law cases that are like that. We can see it from one side, we can see it from the other side. There are some law questions that are very easy. For example, if I ask you, how old do you have to be under the law of Uzbekistan to vote? We had just a recent election. How old do you have to be to vote? 18. Well, that's an easy legal question, and there's no duck rabbit about it. It's just 18. But there are other legal questions where it's more complicated, as we will see. So why did I show this to you? Now, one more exercise. Okay, one more exercise. So this is the 9 dots. Has anybody seen this one?
Yeah.
You've seen it? No? Yeah? Somebody seen it? Yes, you've seen it?
Yeah, kind of. We have to connect it with one line.
Ah, yes, very good, very good. So the puzzle on the 9 dots is, the assignment is, can you connect all 9 dots with no more, they give you 4 straight lines, 4 lines, and without lifting your pen off the paper, okay? So we don't have pencil and paper, we can't really do it right now. I'll show you one of the answers so that you just see, because I wanted to make a point with it. Can you connect all 9 dots? So take a look at that for a second. Try, you can just do it in your, 1, 2, like if you go like 1, 2, 3, 4, well, you didn't get this one. Okay, how about if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, but I didn't get this one? Can you do it?
Can we talk?
Are you raising your hand or thinking? No, not sure. Okay, so you're just trying it. Well, you can try it. See if you can do it. Yeah, you think you can do it?
That's kind of think outside the box.
Oh, great.
I saw it somewhere.
You saw it somewhere. Okay, what's your name?
Rustam.
Rustam. I know that name too. So Rustam says, think outside the box. Think outside the box. Yeah, good, good, good. So this is really, I think this is the first group that I've spoken to. That one person, someone knew about the duck rabbit and someone knew about the 9 dots. And that means that I shouldn't assume that I can keep doing this material. I can't keep doing these exercises because people will already have heard them. But the idea is if you go 1, well, let's say, how would you start? You can go 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can do it. Now, why did I show you this one? Well, what did you think you knew about this problem? Did you make any assumptions? And the assumption could be that your lines were not allowed to go outside the square of dots. And that's why Rustam says, think outside the box. We know that saying also. So why did I show this to you? To remind you when you're trying to solve a problem, to ask yourself if you're making any assumptions about the problem that are blocking you from finding the solution. This is not easy to do. This you can find in books about creative problem solving. So I talked about reading carefully. I talked about comparing the things that you know with Schopenhauer's quote. But creative problem solving is not a simple thing. Some people are better at it than others, but I think you can get better at it. And I think the books that are written about it say try to think outside the box. Try to come up with another thing. Did anybody see the American film Apollo 13? This is an old one, probably from although the paper chase is also very. You've seen, okay, Sardar has seen Apollo 13. Well, there's this great scene. Do you know about Apollo 13?
No.
So Apollo 13. Oh, I have to tell you this. So another difference between the U.S. and Uzbekistan is when I was here one time, my wife was working here teaching. I wasn't. So I went to the planetarium, and there I learned for the first time about Valentina Tereshkova, because we don't hear about Valentina Tereshkova in the United States. And I have granddaughters, and I came back and I said, let me tell you who was the first woman in space. Valentina Tereshkova, you should know that. So that's another thing that we didn't know. But yeah, so in Apollo 13 was one of the American space trips to the moon. And then they had a problem on this spaceship. And they didn't know if they were going to be able to get back safely to Earth. And they had to do a lot of special fixes, special things to get back. And a lot of people were working on these fixes. And they finally did come back safely. It's based on a true story. And if you haven't seen it, it's really one of my favorite movies. Great movie about creative problem solving. Because there's one point in there where they have a problem. The air filter in the ship is not working. And then if they can't make the filter work, they won't have enough oxygen. They won't have enough air. So an engineer comes with a big kind of basket of stuff. He walks into the room with the other engineers, and he says to the other engineers, here are the things that they have up in the spaceship. And he dumps them all on the table. You remember that? Where he dumps them on?
Yeah.
He dumps them on the table. And he says, we have to make something that will fix the air filter with this stuff. And then they do, and they put tape on it, and they have tubes, and it works. But that's an engineer is very good at it. They have to be able to solve these kinds of problems. But lawyers also have to solve problems, and that's a different kind of problem. Okay, so ask if you're making any assumptions that are blocking you from finding a solution. So now, so much for the words and pictures. Now we'll go on to an exercise that teachers give to many American law students. So see how you do with this. This is not like those others. I don't think you'll have heard this. But if you have, tell me. The exercise is called Vehicle in the Park. Vehicle. Now, does everybody recognize the word vehicle?
Yeah.
You do. Good, good. That's very good. Just imagine that there's some law, city code. I actually put stuff in here which maybe I don't. I put this in for my students. You may not even need this. Good for you. A person who I'll just read the English, okay? A person who brings a vehicle into a city park is guilty of a violation which shall be punished by a fine of $100. You may not even needed all those words. Good. You bring a vehicle into the park, then you have to pay a fine, money, of $100. Okay, you got that? Now I'll ask you some questions. What if a man drove his Chevrolet Lacetti into the park? Should he be fined?
It depends. It depends.
Yeah, it's fine.
To pay.
It depends.
Oh, it depends. What does it depend on?
The rules of the park. Maybe it's park that allows.
Good, good. It depends on the depends on the rules of the park. But this is what I'm telling you is the rule. This is for the whole city. They say you're not allowed to bring a vehicle into the park, period. So the question is that a vehicle? That's what, you just want to say something?
Well, I think that maybe he accidentally drove into the park. Maybe he was driving near the park and just an accident happened, so he got into the park. So.
Yeah, good, good. Maybe he didn't mean to go into the park. He was driving somewhere and he ended up in the park.
Maybe he doesn't know about the rules.
Sorry?
Maybe he doesn't know about the rules.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't know about the road. But let's assume that he knew it was a park. Did you want to say something? Let's assume he knew. And he drives in, and the question really is it a vehicle? Is the thing that he comes in with a vehicle? So is that a vehicle? Anybody think it isn't? This is like the 18-year-old voting thing. It's very easy. Okay, now how about this one? Woman drove tourist bus into the park, not allowed. Right? A bus, that's a vehicle. Okay, these are the warm-up ones. These are the easy ones. What about this? Motorcycle, Harley Davidson.
This is a vehicle.
You
It's
think
an
so?
engine, so.
But now we go to a new thing. See? What's your name?
Humayun.
Humayun? Yes, Humayun says because it has an engine. See, we didn't have to say That's easy. Car, bus. But now, you know, woman drive her Harley Davidson into the park. Is it a vehicle? Isn't it a vehicle? He says, Humayun says, it's because it has an engine, which starts to show that maybe we have to have a reason for why we're going to call these things vehicles or not. He says, if it has an engine, well, what about this then? Land in an airplane. It's kind of far away. I love this picture, by the way. This is not my picture, but I got it off of Google Images, and I just was laughing that the person who took the photo, this is the person's dog. and it says, oh, I'm walking my dog in the park, and here's a plane. Let's take a photo. And the dog's ears are in the photo. I like that. So what about, so this has an engine?
It has an engine.
Huh? Is it a vehicle?
It is.
Yes, it is.
Anybody think it's not a vehicle?
It is a vehicle. Why not?
Why not? I know, why not? But what could be a reason why it wouldn't be a vehicle?
Without engine?
But let's say it has an engine, yeah. Does a vehicle have to be go on land?
Maybe the reason it flies and not, not on the land. So it does not function on land. No?
Well, that's the question. See, this is the good point. Wumi is saying, well, it flies. Is it a vehicle? Would we call an airplane a vehicle? That's the question.
Yes, I think we can call it a vehicle.
You think so? It has an engine? Okay. Now, why do we have this rule, no vehicles in the park?
No, we can call. Actually, we can say that it is a vehicle, but it is a certain kind of vehicle, which is actually not pertaining to this case.
Oh. Well, but the question is, does the pilot have to pay the money? That's the question.
No, he does not have.
Oh, you think no?
Yeah, because because.
Why not?
Because he's not driving.
He's not driving. but he's the pilot. You mean not moving right now?
No, I mean like he's pilot, not driver.
Well, that's the question. If you're a pilot, do you
Maybe he has
pilot a vehicle? Is a plane a vehicle or not? And why not?
Well, it's actually it also another violation because you cannot park, for example, plane on the park. You should have it on the airfield.
Well, okay. Let's say he was in trouble. He comes down. Maybe he was just having a picnic. He says, this looks like a nice place to have lunch. I'll just come down here. The point is really, is it a vehicle or not, and why not? So we'll keep going. We're going to keep going now that you got the idea. Now, what if a teenager, see if we had this, see? Okay, engine. What about this? Is that a vehicle?
Yes.
No, you say? No?
Actually, it's vehicle.
It is not.
It's
Actually, well,
It's vehicle.
yeah. Tell me.
Yes, it is vehicle because it has wheels.
Wheels. But you see what's happening? It's a vehicle because it has wheels. Now the plane does have wheels, right? These are the wheels right here.
So what? I have a question now. Look, for example, we have a disabled man.
Oh, we're coming to that.
Disabled man, yeah?
Yes.
And he drives in what? How we call it in English? Yeah, in such a thing. So he's a vehicle too. Or he should be fine.
I'm very happy when a student will say the thing that's on the next slide that they haven't seen yet. So this was coming much later, you see? So you're thinking ahead and you're saying, well, wait a minute, what about a wheelchair? That's what we would call it. A wheelchair. I didn't actually translate this, but it's kind of obvious with the picture. He has an engine, a little engine. Is it a vehicle? Well, we haven't really asked what is a vehicle. You know, some people will say, the law students will say, look up in the code for a definition of vehicle.
There is no definition.
And we're making it so that there's no definition. Okay? But I can show you the dictionary definition. The dictionary defines vehicle as a thing. Oh, that's helpful. A thing. Used for transporting people or goods, especially on land, such as a car or a truck. Here you have, or a cart like a wagon or something. You see the words there.
So even a skateboard is going to be a vehicle?
Even what?
Even a skateboard is going to be?
Well, you know, there's different ones that we use in this. I don't have the skateboard, but that's a question. Would a skateboard be a vehicle? That's the question. How do you decide? If you look at this, does this help you? Does this tell you? Yeah, how about this? Go like this, see? Yeah, go like this. So the idea of what I'm trying to show you is, this is a legal question, but Is it clear what the answer is in every case? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, so then how do we decide? Let's go back and do the rest of the pictures. So this has wheels, but no engine. Okay, now the next one is, what if a girl was playing with a remote controlled boat on a pond? Would she be fined? Why or why not?
No, she'll not be fined.
Not be fined. Why not?
Because it's not like carrying a pest and all that, all goods.
Oh, it's almost, you could say for short. Is it, so you're saying this, Alisher says you're not carrying a person on it.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the definition, it says
It's carrying
for
goods
transporting
or-
people
yeah,
or goods,
transporting
and you could say it's a toy. It's almost like a toy, something to play with, a little boat like that. No, she doesn't pay a fine, and the parents don't pay a fine. But let's go on for the rest of these. Okay, same thing. What if a 4-year-old boy, here's his little car with wheels? Is he going to be fined?
It's a toy.
What?
It's a toy.
It's a toy. It's a toy. Yeah,
And
it's a toy.
quite small. No one can see it and find it.
Right, well, how about that? Yeah, well, that's right. So he brought it in his pocket, right? So this is a toy. But then we say, well, it's a toy vehicle. So why is it a vehicle? All it says in the law is a vehicle. But we don't want to bother with this. Why don't we want to bother with this? What do we want to bother about with the vehicle? What's the reason why they made that law? What do they want to do? What is, whoever it was, the city council, what are they trying to accomplish with this law?
It's like
Bothering to the environment.
Bothering to the environment.
Yes.
In what way?
By them
noise.
Noise. So now, does somebody else want to say something over there? Pollution. If you have an engine. Yeah, so people come up with noise, pollution. There's one more that people usually come up with. Yeah.
Vehicles can be dangerous.
Dangerous. That's the third one.
Yeah, like
This is a good group. Good. What's your name?
Sound
Sardor. Okay, good. Yeah.
and also traffic is a part.
And also what?
Traffic.
Traffic. Yeah. So that's sometimes people say about traffic. People are going there to be in a peaceful place. They don't want to worry about danger, get hit by a vehicle. They don't want the noise. They don't want the pollution. Sometimes people say if they go on the grass, it will hurt the grass or the plants or something like that. So these are the reasons. Now, once you decide why the reason is, then you may have a way of answering some of these questions, because it's a different way of thinking. One way of thinking is, what is a vehicle? We know what a vehicle is. We just have to decide if this is it or it isn't. The definition didn't really, I like that comment, didn't really tell us. But then when we say, well, if it's noise, then a bicycle is not noisy. If it's danger, well, obviously the car is not, the little toy car is not dangerous or noisy or polluting. So you're going to end up with different answers depending on what you think the purpose of the law is. And then what if a father pushed a baby in a stroller into the park? Oh, yeah. Yeah. How about that? Is that a vehicle? No engine, no engine.
no pollution, no noise.
No pollution, no noise.
It's not dangerous.
Hmm?
It's not dangerous.
Not dangerous. Now, let's say you went up a hill, and then the father is being very careful with his baby, but then he goes, achoo, and he lets go of the thing, and it comes running down the thing. So we can imagine that could be dangerous, but probably not dangerous. What's your name?
mostly
What's your name? Sorry?
Don't know.
Okay. So then, probably not dangerous. A stroller is probably not dangerous. So good. So let's go on. Finally, this one. How about this? Pogo stick.
It's
Not dangerous. It's maybe dangerous for him. That's okay.
But no for other people.
Well, not for other people. No, I don't think so. I don't think it's dangerous for other people. So then you might say, that's okay. Because if you were the judge and these cases came to your court, you would have to decide. Do you get a fine or do you not get a fine? And so how do you decide? That's what this exercise is meant to, it's meant to suggest that question to you. How do we decide? How do we think about it? And then we remember the duck rabbit. Well, if it's noise, it's one thing. If it's danger, it's another thing. And finally, what about this one? How about this? Is this a vehicle? Sure it is. It's the ambulance. But is he going to be fined? Is the driver going to be fined?
No, it's an emergency situation.
It's an emergency situation or an exception.
It's exception.
Yeah. So this is if you use common sense. But what does this say? No, I'm going in the wrong direction. What does this say? Oh wait, where is the definition?
You mean to transmit goods or?
I guess yeah. Okay. So right. So you're saying it's a thing used for transporting people or goods, especially on land. Okay, such as a car, truck, or cart. An ambulance is. If you have to apply these words, well, then you'd have to say, sorry, you have to pay. But nobody would want the ambulance to pay. It's an emergency situation. We're going to make an exception for common sense. There is something that's more important than staying out, even if it is got an engine, even if it does pollute, even if it is noisy, even if it might even hit somebody, because the person is hurt, and they have to take care of it.
Because all of these rules made for in order to care of the people.
Yes.
Yeah. And emergency is also care of, like look after.
And it's a bigger one.
Yeah, it's a
so
bigger one.
so Alisher is saying these are rules about caring for people, but when you have an emergency, that is a bigger rule, and so that should really control.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. So good. So you get the idea of that. Just learn that. Understand that sometimes we're not sure whether it is actually a vehicle or not, and we have to think about the reasons. And even if those other things, is it a vehicle or is it not? So that's one kind of legal problem. We're not sure. It's kind of general or vague. Where is the line between what is a vehicle and what is not a vehicle? But this ambulance is definitely a vehicle. It is a vehicle. Nobody would say it's not a vehicle. But we have another principle that comes into play, which is if it's an emergency or it's to help people, we have to make an exception. Okay. It wouldn't make sense to find the emergency vehicle here. Okay, now vehicle in the park finally. Okay, does this help answer the question, which are the things that we looked at? Answer, it's a great answer. Okay. And then it does not answer all the questions. How do we decide? Well, one way is to ask what's the purpose of that law? And the fact is we don't actually know, but we can imagine that it could be noise, pollution, and things like that. And maybe the judges will get a case that they really have to think about, but maybe they never will. But in that case, sometimes you can find out what motivated the people to make the law by looking back into what was going on at that time. Let's say someone was hurt in the park right before. Then you might say, oh, it's because of danger. See, that must have been why. See, but it also might have been the neighbors, people living nearby, saying, oh, it's so noisy, all those cars, and then that would tell you. So there is sometimes a way to learn something about the purpose of the law in the minds of the legislators. Okay. So now any questions or comments about vehicle in the park? Okay, this is the thing. Yes? Sorry, I can't hear you. What about? It's about the ambulance, but I can't hear your question.
No, it's not a question, it's kind of comments. Maybe just people in the future will just build special roads for the ambulance.
Oh, yes. Yes, sometimes you find that. This road, you might find a sign on the road in the park. That's really a very interesting suggestion. And it might say, this is only for emergency vehicles. Access for emergency vehicles only. That's if they're really thinking about it. Because they would say, I cannot drive my car there, and maybe the woman cannot drive her Harley Davidson there. But if it's access for emergency vehicle access only, that's a good idea.
Now that's for buses in our country.
It's like extra line for bus.
Oh, the bus line, it's like that. Well, now you're taking the problem, which is just this legal problem, and you're turning into a like a city design problem. How shall we set up the city so that we don't have these kinds of problems? It's not about law. It's another way. One way you can control things or regulate things is by laws, by rules. But another way, of course this is a rule, is by building different kinds of things like a bus lane. And say this will be the solution to the problem of buses in traffic. That's another kind of social solution. Good. Okay, let's go on. So now we turn to the American legal case. We have time to do it. This case is called, well, here it is, Riggs v. Palmer. New York Court of Appeals, 1889. So the V there means, it stands for versus or against. So these are the two sides of the law case. One was what we call the plaintiff, the person who is bringing the lawsuit. The other person is the defendant, the person defending against the lawsuit. And this was a civil case. You could have a criminal case. Also, the word defendant is the person who's accused of a crime. So this was the court that it was in. It's a state court. I know you know about New York. And so the Court of Appeals is the highest court in the state of New York. And it was in the year 1889. Now this is another example of a difference between the United States and Uzbekistan, as you will see, as we get to the end of the problem. So let me tell you the facts of the case. And then we start with the facts of the case, and then I will ask you how you think the case should be decided. So there's no pictures in this one, but it's an interesting problem anyway. So this is a long thing. Francis Palmer, he made a will. Does everybody know what a will is?
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to give your property to somebody in the next generation, or even the same generation, when you die, you write down and say, when I'm gone, give my money to so-and-so. So he wanted to leave most of his property, the things that he owned. He had a farm, it so happens, as well as some money, to his grandson. His grandson was named Elmer. So these are American names, Francis and Elmer. He was age 14. Elmer lived with his grandfather. Francis was a widower. You might know the word widow. Widower, his wife had died. Elmer knew that he was supposed to receive the grandfather's property when his grandfather died. Probably the man said, oh, my grandson Elmer, when you die, this farm will be yours, and that makes me feel good that I can hand it on to my dear, dear grandson, whom I love so much. Oops. 2 years after Francis made his will, he married again, and he started talking about changing his will. Now, who would not be happy? Why do you think he was going to? Who was going to benefit from his changing his will? Who would be?
His wife.
The wife, the new wife. So who's going to not benefit from the will? Elmer. So he says 2 years after Francis made his will, he married again, and he started talking about changing his will. Oh, Elmer didn't like that. So when he was age 16, he murdered his grandfather. This is a true case. By poisoning him. You know, he gave him poison. Yeah?
Are people considered minor at the age of 16 in the U.S.?
Yes.
So is he not going to be punished for the murder in the way he would have been if he
It's a wonderful question. The answer's on the next slide. But this is a great question. The question, of course, is, well, he's 16 years old. I mean, is he going to go to jail? What's going to happen to him? Well, he's a 16-year-old people. How many people are age 16 here today? Okay, there's some 16-year-old people. You know the difference between right and wrong. There may be also some, I mean, are there younger people too than 16? Young, like 15, 14. Oh, yes, okay. And maybe some people older, 17, 18. So think about it. Okay, good. He's 16 years old. He murders his grandfather. That's why I said, oh, Elmer, I love you so much, my grandson. He kills him for the money. And he poisons him. He gives him poison to eat. I don't know how he did it. The case doesn't always tell you all the facts that you want to know. How did he do that? You know, did he give him his juice in the morning or chai? Just put some stuff in? I don't know how he did it. So he murdered his grandfather, and now they don't say this, but we assume to make sure that his grandfather did not change the will. He knew he would be the person getting the money under the will, according to the will. He didn't want it to be changed. So now what happens? Elmer was convicted of murder, and this is the answer to your question. He went to the reformatory, which is a place where they send the young people who they don't want to send with the adults. But they do say he was 16 years old. He was old enough to know what he was doing. He's not like, wasn't 8 years old. And so he has to...
Is he going to be on his record?
What?
Is that?
Oh, is that going to be in his record? That's a question of criminal law. I don't know. I don't know the answer. It may be that as a minor, there are different rules because the law doesn't want to punish someone for something they did as a child when they were not perhaps as responsible as an adult. But they also say you can't.
He's still conscious enough to.
Yeah, he's still conscious enough to know what he's doing. He knew what he was doing. He was killing somebody. You don't have to be 18 or 21 or 40 to know that that is not allowed, and that's what he did. But would it go on his record is a very good question. I don't know the answer, but I knew there are rules about what they do with juvenile, what they call juvenile. Do you know that word, juvenile?
Yes.
Okay, juvenile. It's a young, it's not that important, but a young person who has committed a crime. Do we really want that crime to be on their record for their whole life? I don't know about what they were doing in this case. So he was convicted of murder, sent to the reformatory. Now, based on the written law of wills, I don't have that for you because this case does not say what the law of wills was in New York at that time. But you can assume that what it was to have a will saying where you want your property to go after you die. It must be written. It must be, you must have 3 witnesses, stuff like that. Very things that just had to do with the form to make it very serious. So if somebody wrote it down and the witnesses saw the person sign, then if somebody finds that will, they would honor that will. They would consider that will valid. So I don't have that actual law that was in effect then, but assume that it was stuff like that. And those formal things, I'm sure it was, was written down. I'm sure there were enough witnesses. There was nothing to say that it wasn't a valid, that is, a lawful, a legal will. So now, but nevertheless, still, Francis's daughters, this is the daughters of Francis, they filed a lawsuit. They went to court. They wanted to cancel the will. They said, Elmer should not get that will. Elmer should not get that property. He killed his grandfather. How could you give him the money if he killed his grandfather? It would be like finding the ambulance. See? It doesn't make sense. But that was what the law said. So the first judge who heard the case dismissed it. That is to say, the judge said, look, I know that Elmer really doesn't deserve to get that money, but the law is the law. And it says that I don't have the authority to change the law. And so therefore, I'm saying to the Francis's daughters, tough, too bad, there's nothing I can do. So then the daughters appeal. They ask for review of the case to the Court of Appeals. So now what is the Court of Appeals going to do? So now who thinks Elmer, the grandson, should get his grandfather's property? And who thinks should not? So number one, we'll just do hands, and then we'll see if we have. Who thinks Elmer should get his property? Yes, do you think so? Yes? Raise your hands if you think. Let's just see how many people. Yeah, 1, 2, 3,
Should or should?
4, 5. Should. That Elmer gets the money, gets the property.
Because it's law.
What?
Law is law.
The law is law. That's the reason. Law is law, but there's about 5. Now, how many people think he should not get the money? More people. Why not?
Of course not.
Why?
Because it's not, he's not deserving.
He doesn't deserve it.
He
Fine.
killed his grandfather.
Well,
Wait a second, I'll come back to you, yeah?
He killed his grandfather.
He killed his grandfather.
Yes, yeah, he didn't deserve it.
Now, don't forget, he was punished for the murder.
No, I mean like his grandfather. He didn't deserve to be killed.
Oh, the grandfather did not deserve to be
Yes,
killed. No, he
he
did
was
not.
here.
He did not deserve to be killed. Okay, so these are the reasons. On the one hand, the law is the law, and the people who think it doesn't make sense do listen to the people saying the law is the law. You know what I mean? Like, hear that and say, yeah, I mean, what is the law? Then you start thinking, like, what is the law? Is the law going to allow this? What kind of thing is that? Well, that's what we talked about in my module in the university. Okay, so that was that. Hold on, I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Well, I think the judges in the Court of Appeals, they should review the case again for in the previous litigation, because there might be a possibility that, for example, his new wife might have, for example, poisoned him and might have and might have accused his son like he did it. It's not me like, and everything, and so it's a very high possibility.
Yeah, so one thing I just want to say is that his murder conviction was not being reviewed. In other words, the question is, maybe Elmer didn't do it. Maybe he was the wife did it, you know. But that's not what that case was about. Remember I said this is a civil case, just has to do with the will. And the criminal case, apparently nobody disagreed that Elmer had actually killed his grandfather. Nobody disputed that. He didn't deny it. Now, 16-year-old, I think something about 16-year-old must have been he thought he could get away with this. Tells you something about what how some 16-year-olds think. Not anybody here, of course. But he was thinking, oh, I'll just get away with it. I'm saying, are you kidding me? How could you get away with it? But anyway, yeah.
So I'm gonna support the notion the law is law. At first you said that in Uzbekistan legal system is civil law kind of Roman German we call it. And according to our civil code, if the person kills the person who's gonna give the bill, cannot be inherited.
Yes,
According to our civil code.
that's true.
And according to our civil procedural code, the court doesn't have to prove that the person who killed that person. If there is a decision of the criminal court, the civil court, judge, doesn't have to prove that anymore.
Yeah.
That means Elmer will not get the property.
Yeah.
at the end.
Yes, exactly right. So now we're just about at 4 o'clock. Do I have a few more minutes to wrap up? Okay. So good. So you see, this is one of those cases where you guess the next slide. Very good. So let's just take a look at that slide. Article 1119, Civil Code of Uzbekistan. And what they say is elimination of the unworthy, like not deserving. He was an heir, so I'm saying you pronounce this, even it looks like here, H-E-I-R, but it's pronounced heir. It's one of those funny English words. But the idea is that a person, this is from the Civil Code, it's very good, persons who have deliberately taken the life of the testator. The testator is the person who makes the will. That's Francis in this case, or any of the possible heirs, even if they try to kill some of the other people who are going to take the money, or have even tried, made an attempt, have no right to inherit. So you might say the law in Uzbekistan is better than it was in New York, because it was made part of the law that Elmer does not take the money. But because they didn't have it there, it's just an exercise. And I've had people, I've given this case to lawyers in Uzbekistan, and they say, but we have the civil code, why are you bothering us with this? Really, we have a civil code, we know what the right answer is, and it's how our law is. And so I say, yes, but it's just to ask these questions but I said, but suppose you didn't have it, then how would you decide? If you go to the code and it's not there, what would you do?
Well, I want to add one more thing. You said that, for example, judges make law.
Yeah.
So if the New York Court of Appeal decided in favor of, for example, of this guy, so it would set a precedent actually.
Yes.
And people would start just killing and arguing this case.
Well, this is a thought. The thought that if you allowed Elmer to take the money, maybe other grandchildren would say, oh, that's a good idea. Let's just kill our grandfather. And then the court says it's okay. Yeah, now you would assume that the legislature would immediately change the law so that it would be part of the code. But the judges who decided, I haven't told you how they decided yet. That's the last piece and then we'll be done. They said, but some of the judges said, well, we don't like the idea of Elmer going to New Zealand and lying on the beach and enjoying the money. We don't want Elmer to do that, even if you change the law for the next grandson. But that's a very good point. Okay, let's just now, I guess we have to finish, so let's go back to just go through the rest of these. Here we are. Here we did this. Should or should not, the reasons, we talked about it. So here's how they decided the case. Okay. There were 7 judges on the Court of Appeals. 5 said Elmer should not get the money. The majority said he does not get the money. 2 said he should get the money. So Elmer did not get the property. But the 2 judges said, I mean, they didn't use the words exactly, but it was essentially the law is the law. We don't have the authority as judges to make the law. The legislature makes the law.
So it's separation of powers.
So you read my mind. The next thing here in your Constitution, and I know people have been thinking about the Constitution, separation of powers. So this now goes into constitutional law, where you have the judges, you have the legislature, you have the president, but the judge takes it very seriously. These judges, 2 said they should get the property. He should get the property because he says, I'm a judge. I don't make the law. I follow the law. And the law says here it's a valid will. But then the 5 judges said, but we can't allow it. It's like the ambulance case. We just can't allow it. We have to find a way. And they basically say, look, if Francis had lived, he wouldn't have wanted. The whole purpose of a will is that the person whom the testator wants to get the money should get the money. But if Francis knew that Elmer was going to kill him, he surely wouldn't have wanted him to take the money. And the legislature that made this rule, it must be because they didn't think about it. It's not that they want Elmer to get the money. That doesn't make much sense. And one of the arguments they give is that in the civil law countries, he wouldn't get the money. And that's a reason why he shouldn't get the money. But then the 2 judges say, but we're not in a civil law country. The legislature didn't pass that rule. So they go back and forth. So that's what happens. But these 2 judges were very consistent. They say the law is the law. We know that sometimes there are decisions we don't like. But if we start changing the law like that, what will become of the law? And that's why I agree, by the way, I should tell you, with the majority. But it's important to hear the other side, because it's a serious position to say, well, where do you stop in changing the law that is made by the legislature? Then not only separation of powers, if we're talking about the legislature, what else are we talking about? A big concept in political theory. Who is the Oli Majlis? They're the representatives of the people. So then what big concept is at stake if we don't follow what the Oli Majlis said? Democracy. See? So this is another thing to keep in mind. So now we're almost done. The judges explained their reasons. The 5 judges basically said, he murdered his grandfather to get the property, just like you said here. So I just want you to notice, these are the judges. But you already were saying, hey, he's not deserving. He shouldn't get it. That's what they said. Letting Elmer have the property would not be right. So going back to Schopenhauer, you see, you can think for yourself. I didn't tell you what the answer was. I just said, here are the facts. You tell me. Think it through. And so good for you. The 2 judges who were saying he should get it, but the law is the law. Again, not in those words. But they basically said, we as judges don't have the authority to change the law. We don't like, and at one point he says, oh, I don't like it any more than you do. It's not that it's not that I don't care about justice. I care about justice, but I'm a judge, and this is my job. That's what he said. Based on the written law of wills, the law was a legal will. So now do you know how it would be decided in Uzbekistan? You already figured it out. Good for you. He would not have received the property. Here it is. Under the written law of wills, a person who murders a testator has no right to inherit from the person who's murdered. But in 1889, the written law of wills in New York did not say that. That was the problem in Riggs v. Palmer. You can read it online if you want. Look for Riggs v. Palmer. But the language is a little bit old-fashioned. But if you're interested in this, you can find it online, Riggs v. Palmer. Any questions or comments about Riggs v. Palmer? Yes. Oh, just no. Okay. Any questions or comments about anything in our session about me or any other topic?